The Wolf of Moscow, the Vasili Komaroff story. In the chaotic years following the Russian Revolution, as the young Soviet Union struggled to establish order from the ashes of the old empire, a different kind of terror stalked the streets of Moscow. Between 1921 and 1923, in the poor neighborhood south of the capital, residents began discovering gray sacks containing the corpses of naked men, their heads smashed in and their bodies tightly bound. These horrific discoveries would lead to the exposure of one of the Soviet Union's first documented serial killers, a man whose crimes would earn him the nickname, the Wolf of Moscow. This is the story of Vasili Komaroff, a horse trader whose systematic murders of at least 33 men would challenge the new communist state's belief that such evil could not exist in their socialist paradise. To understand the emergence of Vasili Komaroff as a killer, we must first examine the turbulent world of early Soviet Russia. The years following the 1917 revolution were marked by civil war, economic collapse, and massive social disruption. Millions of people were displaced from their homes, traditional institutions had been destroyed, and a new society was being built from the ground up. In this environment of chaos and uncertainty, life had become cheap. People disappeared regularly, some fleeing the country, others executed as enemies of the state, still others simply vanishing into the vast expanse of the collapsing empire. It was a perfect time for a predator to operate, when missing persons might be attributed to the general upheaval rather than criminal activity. The introduction of Lenin's new economic policy in 1921, which allowed limited private enterprise, created new opportunities for both legitimate business and criminal exploitation. It was against this backdrop of social transformation and institutional weakness that one of history's most systematic killers would begin his deadly career. Vasily Terentovich Petrov was born on January 1, 1871, in Vitebsk Governorate, Russian Empire, into a large but desperately poor family. From his earliest years, he was surrounded by the social problems that would later manifest in his own criminal behavior. Alcoholism, poverty, and violence were constants in the Petrov household. Many members of Petrov's family suffered from alcoholism, a problem that was endemic in Russian society of the time. Young Vasily began drinking at the remarkably early age of 15, establishing a pattern of substance abuse that would plague him throughout his life and contribute to his violent tendencies. When he came of age, Petrov was conscripted into the Russian army, where he served for 4 years. Military service provided him with structure and purpose that had been absent from his chaotic childhood, but it also exposed him to violence and taught him skills that would later serve his criminal purposes. In 1899, at the age of 28, Petrov married and started a family. When the Russo-Japanese War began in 1904, he moved his family to the Far East, where he was able to earn what he described as a small fortune. However, this period of relative prosperity was short-lived, as Petrov quickly squandered the money and turned to crime to support his family. His first serious criminal conviction came when he was caught participating in a robbery at a military warehouse. The crime earned him a 1-year prison sentence, during which he learned that his wife had died from cholera. This loss, combined with his incarceration, marked a turning point in his psychological development. Following his release from prison, Petrov moved to Riga, where he married Sofia, a Polish widow, and they had 2 children together. To friends and acquaintances, the marriage appeared happy, but those close to the family knew a darker truth. Petrov had become an alcoholic who regularly beat his wife and children. When World War I began, Petrov was living in the Baltic region when German troops entered the area. He was forced to flee with his family to the Russian Volga region, adding to the growing list of disruptions and displacements that had characterized his adult life. With the collapse of the Russian Empire and the rise of Lenin's Communist Party, Petrov, like many disaffected men of his generation, made a fateful decision to join the Red Army during the October Revolution of 1917. This choice would transform his life in ways he could never have anticipated. While serving in the Red Army, Petrov learned to read and write, skills that had been denied to him during his impoverished childhood. His intelligence and leadership abilities were recognized, and he rose to the position of platoon commander, demonstrating a capacity for organization and authority that would later serve his criminal purposes. Petrov distinguished himself during the Civil War by his ruthless efficiency in executing captured White Army officers. This casual attitude toward killing, developed in the context of military service, would prove to be crucial preparation for his later crimes as a serial killer. Petrov's military career came to an abrupt end when he was captured by White Army troops under General Denikin. Though he managed to escape, he feared judgment by the Military Revolutionary Tribunal as a possible deserter. This fear led him to make a decision that would prove crucial to his transformation into a killer. To avoid military justice and start a new life, Petrov assumed a false identity, changing his name to Vasili Ivanovich Komaroff, sometimes spelled Komarov. This new identity represented more than just a change of name. It was a complete reinvention of himself as a different person with no criminal or military past. In 1920, using his new identity, Komarov moved to Moscow with his family, settling at 26 Shabolovka Street, in a neighborhood that would later become synonymous with his crimes. The choice of location was significant. Shabolovka Street was in a working-class area where residents minded their own business and authorities were less vigilant. Komarov began working as a carriage driver and horse trader, occupations that provided him with mobility, access to potential victims, and a plausible explanation for irregular hours and suspicious activities. His criminal background also proved useful, as he continued his thievery while establishing his legitimate businesses. The trigger for Komarov's transformation from petty criminal to serial killer came in February 1921, when Vladimir Lenin declared the new economic policy. This policy allowed private enterprise for the first time since the revolution, creating new opportunities for trade and commerce, and new opportunities for predators to exploit. It was during this period of economic liberalization that Komarov committed his first murder. The combination of new business opportunities, his established position as a horse trader, and his psychological readiness to kill created the perfect conditions for him to begin his deadly career. Komarov's method was both simple and effective. He would position himself at the horse market on Wednesdays and Fridays, not to chase after customers like his colleagues, but to carefully observe and select his victims. His targets were typically peasant buyers who were alone, people whose disappearances might not be immediately noticed. The killer would approach a potential victim and offer to sell him a horse at an unusually low price, claiming that he desperately needed the money. The prospect of such a good deal was irresistible to buyers who had traveled to Moscow specifically to purchase livestock at reasonable prices. Once a victim expressed interest, Komarov would invite him home to discuss the details and celebrate the deal with a drink. This invitation sealed the victim's fate, as none of the men who accompanied Komarov to his home would ever be seen alive again. What happened in Komarov's stable next to his home followed a horrifically consistent pattern. After getting his victims drunk and relaxed, he would attack them with a hammer or strangle them with his bare hands. The violence was swift and efficient, demonstrating both his military training and his complete lack of empathy for human suffering. After killing his victims, Komarov would strip them of all valuables and clothing, though the total amount he gained from these robberies was surprisingly small. Investigators later determined that 33 murders netted him only about $26.40 in total proceeds. This disparity between effort and reward suggested that robbery was not his primary motivation. The bodies were then bound tightly in a distinctive manner that became Komarov's signature. Arms and legs tied to the abdomen so that the corpses resembled chickens trussed for roasting. This specific method of binding suggests both a desire to make the bodies easier to transport and a psychological need to dehumanize his victims. The bound corpses were stuffed into gray sacks and disposed of in a pattern that demonstrated Komarov's methodical nature. Initially, he would hide the bodies around his house or bury them in the surrounding countryside. When these locations became too crowded, he began dumping the sacks in abandoned lots and construction sites throughout the Shabolovka district. As his confidence grew and the number of victims increased, Komarov began disposing of some bodies in the Moscow River. 6 victims were thrown into the water and were never recovered, demonstrating his evolving methods and his understanding of how to avoid detection by varying his disposal techniques. The discovery of Komaroff's crimes began in late 1921, when residents of Moscow's Shabolovka district started finding gray sacks containing corpses in vacant lots and construction sites. The horrific discoveries followed a disturbing pattern. The bodies were nearly always found on Thursdays or Saturdays, suggesting that the killings occurred on a regular schedule. Police investigators quickly noticed the connection between the timing of body discoveries and the horse market schedule. The markets operated on Wednesdays and Fridays, and bodies typically appeared the day after market days. This correlation suggested that victims were being selected from the market crowds. As the investigation intensified, police found 21 male victims in total, each discovered in the same bound condition and dumped in similar locations. The consistency of the method and the geographic concentration of the discoveries led investigators to believe they were dealing with a single, highly organized killer. The police response was systematic and thorough, involving constant patrols of the city and extensive questioning of traders at the horse market and staff at local taverns. Investigators were looking for anyone whose behavior seemed suspicious or inconsistent with normal business practices. The case attracted the attention of experienced Moscow detectives, who recognized that they were dealing with an unprecedented type of criminal. Serial killing was virtually unknown in Russian criminal history, and the systematic nature of these murders required new investigative approaches. The breakthrough in the investigation came when police began focusing on the horse market itself and the behavior of traders who operated there. Officers noticed one particular trader whose actions stood out from his colleagues in several significant ways. Unlike other horse dealers who actively pursued customers and competed aggressively for sales, this trader, identified as Vasili Komaroff, displayed unusual behavior. He never chased after clients, but instead stood quietly as if watching and waiting for someone specific. Despite his passive approach to seeking customers, Komaroff seemed to have remarkable success in his business. He often came to market without bringing a horse to sell, yet observers noticed that he frequently left with customers. Most puzzling of all, he always seemed to have plenty of money despite his limited visible business activity. This combination of unusual behavior and apparent financial success made Komaroff a person of interest for investigators. The fact that he was present at the markets on the same days that victims were presumably being selected made him an even more compelling suspect. Police began conducting surveillance of Komaroff's activities, but their investigation was careful and methodical. They needed concrete evidence before moving against a suspect, especially in a case involving such serious crimes and so many victims. The final break in the case came on the night of May 18, 1923, when police arrived at Komaroff's home at 26 Shabolovka Street. Initially, they claimed to be investigating reports of an illegal alcohol distillery, a common excuse that allowed them to search the premises without revealing their true suspicions. Komaroff initially maintained his composure when police entered his home, appearing calm and cooperative as officers began their search. However, his demeanor changed dramatically when the investigators approached the storage room next to his stable. Realizing that his secret was about to be discovered, Komaroff suddenly panicked and jumped out of a window, fleeing into the night. His dramatic escape attempt confirmed police suspicions that they had found their killer, and officers immediately searched the storage room he had been so desperate to protect. Inside the storage room, hidden under a stack of hay, police discovered the still warm corpse of Komaroff's latest victim, already bound and bagged in preparation for disposal. The discovery provided incontrovertible evidence that they had found the Shabolovka Street killer. Komaroff's freedom was short-lived. Despite his escape from the house, he was captured the same night in a village near Moscow. His arrest marked the end of a killing spree that had terrorized the capital for nearly 2 years. The speed of his capture demonstrated the efficiency of Soviet law enforcement when they focused their resources on a specific target. Within hours of discovering the evidence in his home, Komaroff was in custody and facing interrogation about his crimes. Under police interrogation, Vasili Komaroff proved to be surprisingly cooperative. Rather than maintaining his innocence or attempting to minimize his crimes, he readily admitted to being the killer that police had been seeking for nearly 2 years. Komaroff confessed to murdering 33 men, acknowledging that his memory might not be entirely accurate given the number of victims and the period of time involved. He claimed that all of his victims had been customers looking to buy horses, and that robbery had been his primary motive. However, investigators quickly recognized that Komaroff's stated motive didn't match the evidence. The total financial gain from 33 murders was absurdly small, suggesting that money was either a secondary consideration or an excuse to mask other motivations. When asked about his crimes, Komaroff displayed a chilling casualness about murder, describing killing as an awfully easy job. He explained his method in a matter-of-fact tone. "I just knocked them on their heads with a hammer or strangled them. It was very easy. I killed a man who tried to beat me in a horse trade. He was the only one who resisted." Following his confession, Komaroff led police to locations where he claimed to have buried victims. However, authorities were only able to find 6 of the 12 bodies he claimed were buried in these locations. The remaining victims had either been disposed of in the river or buried in locations that Komaroff could no longer remember. The investigation also revealed the extent to which Komaroff's wife, Sofia, had been involved in his crimes. Police determined that it would have been impossible for her to remain unaware of the murders being committed in the stable next to their home. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that Komaroff had not been operating entirely alone. His wife, Sofia, had become aware of her husband's murderous activities, but rather than reporting him to authorities, she had chosen to become an active participant in his crimes. According to the evidence gathered by police, Komaroff would typically use false pretenses to get his wife and children out of the house before committing a murder. However, on at least one occasion, Sofia had returned home early and witnessed the gory aftermath of one of her husband's killings. Instead of being horrified by what she saw and running to fetch police, Sofia had made the decision to become a loyal accomplice. She helped clean up the crime scene, washed blood from the floor, and assisted in concealing evidence of the murders. The involvement of Sofia in the crimes added another layer of horror to an already shocking case. Her participation demonstrated how completely the Komaroff household had been corrupted by violence and criminal activity. The evidence also revealed the psychological toll that Komaroff's double life had taken on his family. He was known to be extremely abusive to his wife and children, and had once attempted to kill his 8-year-old son. This domestic violence was both a symptom of his psychological disorders and additional evidence of his complete lack of empathy for human suffering. The trial of Vasili Komaroff began on June 7, 1923, in a case that would captivate the Soviet public and test the new communist legal system's ability to handle unprecedented crimes. To accommodate the massive public interest, proceedings were conducted in Moscow's huge Polytechnic Museum. Both Vasili and Sofia Komaroff were charged with murder, with prosecutors arguing that it would have been impossible for Sofia to remain ignorant of the systematic killings occurring in their home. The trial represented one of the first major serial murder cases in Soviet legal history. During the proceedings, Komaroff displayed what observers described as demonic detachment and demonic indifference. He described his crimes in a level, monotone voice, showing no remorse for his actions and appearing completely indifferent to his fate. When asked about his potential execution, Komaroff responded with characteristic callousness, "I am 52, I have had a good time, and I don't want to live any longer." He also made the grim joke, "Well, it's my turn to be put in the sack now," demonstrating his complete lack of remorse even in the face of death. A comprehensive forensic psychiatric examination was conducted to determine Komaroff's mental state and legal responsibility for his crimes. The evaluation diagnosed him as an impulsive psychopath with signs of alcoholic degeneration, but crucially found him mentally competent to stand trial. The psychiatric findings were significant because they established that despite his psychological disorders, Komaroff understood the nature and consequences of his actions. He was legally sane and fully responsible for his crimes, making him eligible for the death penalty under Soviet law. On June 8, 1923, in the pre-dawn hours, the court delivered its verdict in a case that had shocked the Soviet Union. Both Vasili and Sofia Komaroff were found guilty of multiple murders and sentenced to death by firing squad. The speed of the verdict reflected both the overwhelming evidence against the defendants and the court's determination to demonstrate that the new Soviet justice system could effectively handle even the most heinous crimes. The death sentences were to be carried out within 3 days of the verdict. However, an 11th-hour change of heart resulted in appeals that delayed the inevitable execution. The appeals process lasted 10 days, during which time Komaroff remained in prison and reportedly attempted suicide 3 times, demonstrating that despite his outward indifference, he was not entirely prepared to face death. The suicide attempts were unsuccessful, and on June 18, 1923, both Vasili and Sofia Komaroff were executed by firing squad in Moscow. The execution marked the end of one of the Soviet Union's first documented serial killer cases. Following the execution, the Komaroffs' orphaned children were taken into state care, becoming another tragic consequence of their parents' crimes. The state assumed responsibility for raising the children of the Wolf of Moscow, attempting to break the cycle of violence and criminality that had defined the Komaroff household. The case of Vasili Komaroff holds significant historical importance as one of the first documented serial murder cases in the Soviet Union. His crimes challenged the new communist state's ideology, which held that such systematic violence was a product of capitalist society and could not exist under socialism. The investigation and prosecution of Komaroff demonstrated the capabilities of early Soviet law enforcement while also revealing the social conditions that could enable such crimes. The case showed that even in a society undergoing revolutionary transformation, individual monsters could still emerge to prey upon the vulnerable. From a criminological perspective, Komaroff's case provides valuable insights into the psychology of early serial killers. His methodical approach, his ability to maintain a normal facade while committing horrific crimes, and his complete lack of remorse for his victims established patterns that would be recognized in later serial killer cases. The case also highlighted the vulnerability of marginalized populations in times of social upheaval. Komaroff's victims were typically isolated individuals, peasants who had traveled to Moscow alone to conduct business. Their disappearances were initially overlooked because they fit into the broader pattern of social displacement that characterized post-revolutionary Russia. The international attention that the case received helped establish the Soviet Union's reputation for swift and decisive justice, even as it revealed the existence of serious criminal problems within the new socialist state. The Komaroff investigation marked a significant advancement in Soviet criminal investigation techniques. The systematic approach taken by Moscow police, including regular patrols, extensive witness interviews, and careful analysis of crime patterns, established precedents for handling complex criminal cases. The case demonstrated the importance of recognizing patterns in serial crimes and the value of coordinated investigative efforts. The connection between market days and body discoveries was crucial to identifying the killer, showing how careful analysis of timing and location could lead to breakthroughs in difficult cases. The investigation also revealed the challenges faced by law enforcement in a society where people regularly disappeared for various reasons. Distinguishing between criminal disappearances and the normal social displacement of the post-revolutionary period required sophisticated analytical skills and persistent investigation. The cooperation between different levels of Soviet law enforcement during the investigation helped establish protocols for handling major criminal cases that would serve the system for decades to come. Modern psychological analysis of Komaroff's case reveals characteristics that are now recognized as typical of serial killers. His ability to compartmentalize his criminal activities, maintain a normal public persona, and show no empathy for his victims all align with current understanding of psychopathic behavior. The role of alcoholism in Komaroff's psychological development cannot be understated. His early exposure to alcohol abuse, combined with family dysfunction and social instability, created conditions that may have contributed to his violent behavior. His military service during the Civil War, Particularly his participation in executing prisoners provided him with both the psychological conditioning and practical experience necessary to kill without remorse. This background demonstrates how wartime experiences can sometimes create or enable civilian criminals. The economic motivation that Komaroff claimed for his crimes appears to have been largely false, given the minimal financial gains from his murders. This suggests that deeper psychological drives, such as the need for power and control, were his true motivations. The involvement of his wife as an accomplice provides insights into how criminal behavior can spread within families and how normal individuals can become complicit in horrific crimes through gradual exposure and psychological manipulation. More than a century after his execution, Vasili Komaroff remains a significant figure in the history of criminal behavior in Russia and the former Soviet Union. As one of the earliest documented serial killers in the region, his case provides important historical context for understanding the development of such phenomena. His story has been preserved in various forms, including academic studies of early Soviet criminal justice and popular accounts of notorious murderers. These retellings help maintain awareness of how social upheaval can create opportunities for predatory behavior. The case continues to be studied by criminologists and historians interested in understanding how serial killers emerge during periods of social transition. Komaroff's crimes provide insights into the relationship between individual psychology and broader social conditions. For Soviet society, the memory of the Wolf of Moscow served as a reminder that even revolutionary change could not eliminate all forms of human evil. The case helped establish the principle that criminal behavior must be addressed through law enforcement rather than ignored or attributed to political causes. The case of Vasili Komaroff offers important lessons for contemporary understanding of serial crime and its investigation. His ability to exploit social disruption and target vulnerable populations remains relevant in today's world, where similar conditions continue to create opportunities for predatory behavior. The methodical nature of his crimes and his success in avoiding detection for nearly 2 years demonstrate the importance of systematic investigative approaches and the need for law enforcement agencies to recognize patterns in seemingly unrelated crimes. Komaroff's case also highlights the ongoing challenge of protecting society's most vulnerable members during times of social instability. His victims were individuals whose disappearances initially attracted little attention, demonstrating the continued need for vigilant investigation of missing persons cases. The psychological aspects of his case, particularly his ability to maintain a normal public facade while committing systematic murders, remain relevant for understanding how dangerous individuals can hide in plain sight within their communities. Today, Moscow is a vast metropolitan area bearing little resemblance to the smaller, more chaotic city that was terrorized by the Wolf of Moscow in the early 1920s. The Shabolovka Street, where Komaroff lived and killed, has been transformed by decades of urban development, and the memory of his crimes has faded from public consciousness. Yet the lessons of his case remain relevant. The 33 men who died at his hands remind us that evil can emerge anywhere, at any time, and that society's most vulnerable members are often the first to suffer when institutions fail to protect them. Vasili Komaroff represents more than just an early Soviet serial killer. He embodies the timeless capacity for human evil that can flourish when social disruption creates opportunities for predatory behavior. His crimes remind us that the price of failing to protect marginalized populations can be measured in innocent lives lost. As we remember the victims of the Wolf of Moscow, we must also remember the circumstances that allowed his crimes to continue for so long. The social upheaval that made victims vulnerable, the initial investigative challenges that delayed his capture, and the economic desperation that he exploited to lure his victims to their deaths. In honoring the memory of those who died, we commit ourselves to building societies where such predators cannot find easy victims, where warning signs are recognized and acted upon, and where justice is both swift and certain. Only through such vigilance can we ensure that the shadow of the Wolf of Moscow never again falls across innocent lives. The story of Vasili Komaroff serves as both a historical record and a contemporary warning. that monsters can emerge from the most ordinary circumstances, that vigilance is eternal, and that the protection of society's most vulnerable members is not just a moral imperative, but a practical necessity for maintaining the safety of all. In a city rebuilding from revolution, among the desperate crowds and crumbling streets of Moscow, Vasili Komaroff offered a handshake and a horse, and delivered death. His victims weren't just nameless peasants. They were men forgotten by a system too broken to notice them missing. The Wolf of Moscow didn't just exploit a moment in history, he thrived in its silence. If this story haunted you, enlightened you, or reminded you of how easily cruelty can wear a smile, please like, share, and subscribe to Weird World Wonders. We uncover the dark truths buried beneath the headlines, not to glorify monsters, but to remember those they silenced. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and never forget, even in times of change, monsters still walk among us.